So, of course, with Joe Biden's election win, um, barring a meteor hitting the Earth, we also have to start asking ourselves, what does a Joe Biden presidency look like for the United States of America? One of the big reasons why I'm making this video is because I've hit the point of my age where I could think proactively, not only for myself, but for a lot of my community. So I got to look at, what does a Joe Biden presidency look like overall? For many people, they look at Joe Biden's for nearly 5 decades of political work, and they try to use what's in the past to kind of conjure up, what the future is going to look like. But I can't do that, mostly because um, 2020 is this landscape and this environment is so much different from what it once was in the 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s. So I can't really use his prior record and then apply it to today. And at the same time, a lot of the things that he was known for prior that were bad, he pretty much has tried his best to absolve himself for. He's not doing the perennial Mike Bloomberg where you're sticking by what you did and proclaiming it that it was right. So I look at a couple different things that I have to consider. But I have a huge disclaimer when it comes to me making this video. I'm making this video as somebody who is not part of the 1% and as somebody who is not making, an obscene amount of money for a United States citizen. I have to point those two things out. I make good money for myself. I make good money to make sure I keep myself, comfortable. I don't live paycheck to paycheck, but I'm not one of these people who either are making, anywhere from mid to high six-figure salaries, or people who are millionaires or billionaires. And the reason why I have to make that disclaimer is because everything I'm going to say right now is from the perspective as the everyday worker. I'm not talking to you as if I make a shit ton of money, because the people who talk to you that make a shit ton of money really do a bad job at talking about these things. So I had to make this disclaimer. So there are 5 topics that I want to cover when I talk about what does Joe Biden's presidency look like to America. The first part is, how will coronavirus look going into 2021? Well, we've already taken a couple of really good steps, and we have to give credit there. They are reforming a task force that actually has scientists on it, which is a really, really large improvement to what you're getting right now. And the biggest thing I could say that is a large improvement to it is, yesterday, Mike Pence announced he's going on vacation. Mike Pence is the vice president of the United States right now, and he's going on vacation. Many people will be like, well, he's just going on vacation. He's gonna be unemployed in a couple of months or whatever. No, big reason why that's a big red flag is Mike Pence is the lead for the task force right now. The lead for the task force for coronavirus is going on vacation. That's him saying, fuck y'all. So with this new Trump task force, you have scientists who didn't agree with Trump's, they didn't agree with Trump when in terms of how he approached it. There were also scientists who felt that Trump didn't take it seriously onto it as well. So Biden has already recruited scientists who not only have in good faith the Democratic side of things, but also Republican side of things. There's also going to be more than likely a revamped stimulus package that goes along with additional unemployment. This is important mostly because a lot of people in the country right now are either backlogged for unemployment. You will more than likely get a retro pay if this stimulus package passes. But also at the same time, you also have to realize that there was not this package that Republicans wanted to push forward did not have enough money into it. It just wasn't. It was a third of what they were willing to pump into it. What was originally pumped in, way back in the springtime. One of the biggest issues about this situation and what's pissed off Republicans about it is, back in March, they wanted to do that deal because a lot of that money went to large corporations. Now, fast forward now, and you're heading into the wintertime, a lot of these large corporations, they pretty much made do. They got their money. So Democrats putting forward a bill of the same amount means that a lot of that money is going to go into small businesses. It's going to go into, people's pockets, and it's going to go into the pockets of people who are less fortunate. And that's not something that Republicans like to do. Republicans hate giving money to people. Let's just be honest about it. So when you look at that, there will more than likely be a revamped stimulus package that goes along with extra unemployment. I think this type of deal, if Biden is able to throw in specifics to it that are able to make Republicans feel easy about it, I think it'll pass the House, it'll pass the Senate. And last but not least, a coordinated vaccine program when it is available. There are a ton of people who are skeptical about a coronavirus vaccine, and many of them are skeptical because of the current president of the United States. And it's mostly because he threw a shit ton of money at a lot of pharmaceutical companies in order to create a vaccine, and he put pressure on them to kind of speed up this vaccine process. And when you've looked at Joe Biden, he's tackling coronavirus as if it just started. So for him, he's not banking on a vaccine. He's banking on pumping money into the economy, to getting us into a position where we can stabilize coronavirus and to keep cases at a minimum, keep deaths at a minimum, because we are out of our fucking minds right now. And as things kind of move on and they push forward, eventually at some point you're going to have a vaccine. So you've been seeing how him and his task force, they've been trying to figure out a way to create a coordinated effort to release this vaccine, because it's not going to be met with really good, public appeal. So you got to make sure that, this vaccine is not just something that works, but it also makes sure that people feel safe taking it. So that's one of the biggest issues to it. And when you look at things such as percentages, right now, the flu shot right now works at a 50% success rate. For coronavirus, they are trying to target somewhere around 90% of an effective rate, because just how much more deadly it is comparison to the flu. So that's one of the big things about like coronavirus that, you have to look at in terms of what the Biden presidency will look like. The second one is the stock market, and what does the stock market look like under Joe Biden? Well, you got a glimpse of it the last week where the stock market soared. It soared off of good news from, the COVID vaccine trials. And it also soared, in good news once you started to get a shape of to how the presidency will look like. Once Donald Trump went through his tumultuous Thursday, where you saw X amount of states flip over to Biden and you saw the stock market start to sort of catch steam into Friday, that was the clear indicator to me that the stock market is getting prepared for a Biden presidency. That's all it is. And I think the biggest thing about it is you're seeing a bunch of people who are looking at things such as insider trading. They're seeing how corporations are, what they're doing with their shares. The real big kicker and the big real flag to me that kind of, signaled to me that Biden was going to win was Jeff Bezos unloading a shit ton of his own shares in Amazon, which tells me that he's getting prepared for the fact that he has to pay more taxes. So he wants more liquidated cash on the side so that this way he doesn't have to have most of his cash tied up into his own company. So that kind of, it makes a ton of sense. But for me, I expect the stock market to look much like it looked like under Obama, but a little bit more scaled back. You're never going to get as much of a bull run as Obama had in terms of the stock market, where he tripled it, in which so many people made money, so many corporations made money. And for big business, Barack Obama in many ways was a lot more of a bright spot for them than what they make him out to be in the media. There's no way that a stock market goes from 6 all the way up to 19,000 and people sit there and say that Obama was bad for the stock market. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous if we're being honest about it. But yet we overlook George Bush, who had the Dow at a negative for his entire presidency. So I expect the stock market to look much like Obama. I expect regulation to allow companies to be competitive so that large corporations are not dominating the market, which makes a ton of sense. The stock market always makes more money when you have more players involved and when you have more players with more to lose involved. So you're going to see regulation go back into the market that's going to allow more and more small companies to further advance themselves, as opposed to being completely and all the time, ruined by bigger companies. So that's one of the big things that I'm looking at with this. And last but not least, I think you're going to get a revamped trade deal that allows the United States to be competitive. The trade deal that the Trump administration signed with China was a huge indictment on our trade. It was really, really bad. We suffered a lot from it. You had a ton of farmers who really, really suffered underneath it. Many of them went out of business. Many of them went bankrupt. Many of them were bought up by large corporations who got bailouts, who got large billion-dollar loans from the Trump administration to basically say, hey, we fucked up. We're sorry. That's essentially what it was. So when you look at the trade deals that will need to be revamped, that's one of the big reasons why you see China dragging their feet with recognizing Joe Biden as president. The reality to it is when a lot of people talk about like Joe Biden's going to be a great president for China, China actually likes Donald Trump because he's stupid and he negotiated the deal that benefited them. So when now you put back the powers of Joe Biden and you put him in a position to renegotiate that trade deal with China, it makes the Chinese government very worried because they're not going to be able to exploit the United States trade market the way that they were underneath the Trump administration. Third big thing that we got to touch on is taxes. And that's why I put that disclaimer in the beginning of the video. Rich people will tell you that Joe Biden will raise your taxes. I need you guys to understand that. Rich people, say it with me now, will tell everyday Americans that Joe Biden will raise your taxes. The reality to it is you're not going to see much of a change in your taxes. And I'm talking to the everyday people. You rich motherfuckers, though, I could give a shit less about you guys. He will more than likely impose a tax on people making over $400,000 a year. You're talking about 18% of the U.S. population that actually will be part of that. I know a ton of people that make that type of money, and I know a lot of them will put their morality ahead of what their pockets look like, but a lot of people won't. And that's why a lot of people voted for Donald Trump, because they don't want to pay their fair share of taxes. You know, a lot of people put a huge indictment on taxes saying that taxes suck. Taxes are horrible. Cool. If you hate paying taxes, then guess what? We should all not pay taxes. But then guess what? Who the fuck is going to build roads? Who the fuck is going to build bridges? Who the fuck is going to do maintenance on all the shit that we need in order to go about our daily lives? You know, what's going to happen with sewage piping? What's going to happen, you know, with tunnels and pipelines that lead to bathrooms and clean water and shit like that? So shut the fuck up and pay your taxes. It's that simple. You know? When I look at the aspect to how taxes are going to be, you know, kind of restructured in the government, it makes a ton of sense. You shouldn't be in a position where you have middle class and low poverty individuals bankrolling state governments, bankrolling infrastructure and X, Y, and Z. A lot of that stuff should come from the major players because ultimately in the end, you guys are the ones who have taken advantage and exploited middle class and people in poverty to build your franchises, to build your wealth. So you should be pumping that money back into the government. And at the same time, you're going to have new department heads that will need more money to put these programs back to where they were. And I'm talking about housing department. I'm talking about, you know, the Fed Reserve. I'm talking about the Treasury. I'm talking about things such as, you know, the energy sector. I'm talking about science. I'm talking about, you know, education. A lot of these departments have had no money for the last 4 years because Donald Trump hasn't even put the right people involved into it. He's let people who do absolutely have no sort of background in these departments take control of them. And all they've done is just reduce spending. He's cut budgeting all around the board so that this way he can compensate for the fact that you have a lack of tax dollars coming in from rich people and you're using the amount of money that is being taken away from poor people and funneling it elsewhere into other things such as the military, such as large corporations and tax breaks and, you know, and giving people, you know, X, Y, and Z. Whereas these new department heads, with now there being a higher tax threshold on rich people, are going to need those extra dollars to kind of rework and revamp those departments. And those departments need a massive overhaul. So that's what taxes will look like for those. And last but not least, rolling back the Trump taxes, in which there's one big key thing, and this is one thing that a lot of rich people won't tell you about Trump's taxes. They will tell you that Joe Biden will raise taxes on the middle class. What they're leaving out is the Trump tax plan that was passed when he took office, had a specific clause in there that would kick in an additional tax on the middle class in 2021. And that's something that a lot of you fucking idiots are not trying to acknowledge. And it's pissing me off because Let's say Biden doesn't pass a tax plan, and let's say we're stuck with Trump's tax plan for maybe another year heading into 2022. Guess what that's going to mean? You're going to have all these fucking Republicans saying that taxes increased under Joe Biden, and all of a sudden you're going to have all these people getting upset. Meanwhile, it's fucking Trump's taxes that are doing this shit. So if Biden is able to roll back Trump's tax plan, which is set to kick in additional taxes for the middle class, coming up in 2021, it'll be a huge victory for them. Huge victory for them. You know? And of course, you know, we also have to talk about things such as racial injustice. Joe Biden won mostly because of the black vote. That's kind of what fueled, you know, places like Philadelphia and Atlanta and, you know, Savannah. You know, it fueled, you know, places in Phoenix. A lot of black people came out to vote for Joe Biden. So because of a lot of black people voting out for Joe Biden dog, you gonna have to give us something. Because if not, you're gonna be out of office in 4 years. I'm just gonna be honest about it. So when you look at the current tax plan and you look at, you know, things such as racial injustice, there's a lot of things that you need to make considerations to. Number one, Joe Biden put forward a George Floyd bill, which I would love to see passed. It's a huge indictment on how police govern themselves in the United States. It provides more clarity. It provides more reasons for us not to get a fucking bullet put in our backs. So yes, I want something like that to pass. You also have the Voters' Rights Act, which I feel should be on his agenda. I don't care if he needs an executive order. Put that shit back. There's no reason why we should ever go through an election like we just did. We should have as many polling places as possible. You should have at least 3 polling places in your neighborhood if you live in the United States. And because that Voters' Rights Act had been stripped down back in 2013, you lost 1,200 polling places because Republicans don't like it when black people vote. So put the polling places back in. It's that simple. And last but not least, you really have to reward the black community. Joe Biden needs to take tax dollars and fundamentally appropriate them to black communities so that this way we don't feel over-policed. This way we don't feel like there is a systematic issue going on. This way we know that banks are going to look at us weird when we go in to get housing loans and get personal loans and car loans, you know. He has to sit there and he has to take the additional tax dollars and he has to be able to put that money with the people in these organizations that have been fighting for these things. You know, looking to increase education, increase the quality of home, increase the ability for black people to open businesses and to have money and to be able to do things that a lot of our non-black counterparts can do. So yes, there's a lot for it to happen. And I do think the biggest thing that we're going to have to be struggling with in Joe Biden's presidency is the balance of power in the United States government. So right now in the House, you have the Democrats who kept their majority, but their majority is really just at 218. So because their majority is just at 218, it leaves very little margin of error for Democrats to really, you know, go with really aggressive plans. For many of them, it's going to involve them working together with Republican counterparts. And the same thing with the Senate. Right now, you have 50 seats that essentially are, you know, kept aside for Republicans. You got 48 seats for Democrats. Democrats picked up an additional seat in this election. They also lost a seat to Tommy Tuberville. I don't know how that guy won. I really don't know. But for Democrats, picking up their seat in Arizona is a huge win for them because John McCain originally had that seat. So you have 50 to 48. You have 2 special elections now in Georgia in which I'm hopeful that a lot of the same people that showed out to vote for this election show up to the special election because, you know, the Senate is really big. If you get the Senate at a 50-50 split, you don't need to kind of tread water the same way that you would do in the House. Because if the Senate is 50-50, then it's really just Kamala Harris that kind of just gives the deciding factor on any policy. And there won't be no essential majority leadership. You have a split 50-50 split, and you will have parties on one side and the other side that have to make agreements. And if I'm the Democrats, why wouldn't I put somebody like an Elizabeth Warren, you know, in a position to, you know, talk shit to Republicans? So I think that if they are able to get the same 50-50 seat hole, win those two special elections, I think one of them is, I think the one with Warnock is definitely one that they can definitely win. The Ossoff seat is the one that's really going to come down to the wire, simply because Purdy represents a lot of systematic racism that a lot of Georgians like. So it's going to be really hard to unseat him. But the fact that he got to where he got is really, really good. And in terms of Ossoff, I'm saying, if the fact that he was able to cut into Purdue's lead like that, I think he has a good shot at winning. But I do believe that the Senate, should they go to 50-50, it's going to be much easier for them to pass legislation, because you simply just have a vice president who's there to just simply just say, cool, I'm signing off on this. Very same way that they got Betsy DeVos as the head of education. And last but not least, you have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is interesting. Like, it's very interesting for a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons why it's interesting is because the judges that Trump put in place, as much as we want to consider them to be the Trump picks, they're kind of trying to make sure that they don't piss off Republicans. And what I mean by that is, they just sat there and they just heard about, the Affordable Care Act. And two of those Trump judges doesn't sound like they want to actually vote against, taking it down. I mean, they don't want to vote for taking it down. It just seems like they're willing to do what's best for them and what's best for the party, which is something that John Roberts has had a tendency to do. John Roberts is, in my opinion, like Amy Barrett, 1.0, in terms of, he was a very young judge who wasn't fit for the Supreme Court. But once George Bush got into office, he was able to nominate him to be the Chief Justice at 42 years old at that. And John Roberts was one of the big reasons why the Affordable Care Act passed. He was the one that broke the deadlock to be 5-4. And he's also been the judge who has broke the deadlock on a lot of things that has not benefited Republicans, even though he is a Republican and he was put there by a Republican judge. But I think I was listening to Larry Wilmore, and he was talking about how the Bush Republicans no longer exist, and I had to agree with him. They don't exist. So for people like Brett Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and now Amy Barrett, does it make sense for you to be making decisions as if President Trump is there or as if President Biden is there? Does it make sense for you to know that these individuals will come and go, but you're going to be in a lifetime position? So do you ultimately want to be the judge that strikes down Roe versus Wade? Do you want to be the one that strikes down Brown versus the Board of Education? Do you want to be the one that strikes down the Affordable Care Act? That's a lot of things that you got to consider for yourself. And that's one of the big things that I gotta basically end this video at.